Specifically about, I'm Eric Cunningham from Gonzaga University, and I'm not speaking specifically to the question of the South China Sea. I've done a lot of research on the topic, but it seems like the typical international mayhem that almost has no clear solution. It seems to be exactly the kind of problem. Well, much remains to be seen with regard to this issue. What I decided to do instead is, as I'm preparing for a class on Mao Zedong and Mao's China in the upcoming semester, just sort of a broad historical meditation on the nature of Chinese power in the Pacific region. So I'm calling this China, the Deep State, and the Age of Trump. There's like several controversial topics in here, I suppose, but I'm not seeking to offend anybody, but you never know how these things play out these days. We seem to be living in an era in which all of our assumptions about the way the world works are being called into question. As a historian, I find that the standard narratives about world history make less and less sense as the world moves away from the structures of modern progressive development defined by the Western Enlightenment model into a completely new space of crisis and possibility. And it's probably fair to say that my view of the world is increasingly becoming that of the conspiracy theorist, which in the minds of respectable thinkers makes my ideas invalid before I even utter them. But in my defense, I would say that conspiracy theory is the best way to analyze conspiracy, and the evidence seems to be overwhelming, to me anyway, that the modern world that we have been living in, maybe until certain recent events, has been very much a planned, programmed, and even orchestrated thing. Now, despite the claims of conventional scholars and policymakers that our historical world is a process of organic development, a development that has taken us naturally from tribal societies to feudal kingdoms to nation states, and now into some kind of international community, it seems increasingly clear that there's nothing organic or naturally developmental about any of this. For the last 500 years, at least, perhaps prior to this, our historical world has been a well-run process of boom, bust, crisis, and power acquisition. As to who's running the project, opinion has been long divided. And there may be no clear answers. There are likely several culprits to this, and their goals may not be mutually compatible. The contours of what we call a global world as opposed to an international world started to come into clarity in the 1990s when the Cold War came to an end. At that time, the last dialectical clash of modern history, which was the clash between communism and capitalism, seemingly came to an end. And the apparent triumph of capitalism was supposed to usher in an age of peace, prosperity, democracy, and freedom. We know that heading into the third decade of the 21st century that this has yet to transpire. What we gained instead was the replacement of an international Cold War anxiety with a new paradigm of global terror, global finance, global markets, global information exchange, and as is always the case after major historical shifts, the consolidation of global wealth and power into the hands of a much smaller group of people. So we're living at the end of a long period, I think, of experimentation. And the experiment seems to be testing whether or not a tiny group of very wealthy and influential people can in fact take over the assets of an entire planet. Now, a key piece of this experiment has been China. In its various incarnations as a fading empire between 1793 and the Opium War of 1842, as an oppressed semi-colony after the Opium War until the Revolution of 1911, as a kind of petri dish for competing totalitarianisms between 1911 and 1949, as a people's democratic dictatorship. That's actually what Mao called it, a people's democratic dictatorship between 1949 and 1976, and as a ruthless but self-reforming tyranny between 1976 and 1999, and now as the paradigm apparently for global enslavement and control from 2000 up until the present day. So what I'm suggesting is that the entity that a conspiracy theorist would call the deep state, although that's pretty much a common term now, which is the deep state. It's a non-elected group of bureaucratic, financial, and media elites who actually run the world, have been manipulating China since 1842, preparing it to be the successor to the liberal West, which they apparently also brought into being during the 18th century. Now, China's recent radical ascent into global power, I would say, has little to do with its inherent qualities as a nation state. China has been, since 1949, a horror show, run by unimaginative and thuggish plutocrats who've been falsely propped up by Western professors and journalists as brilliant statesmen and political philosophers who possess not only the inscrutable ancient wisdom of the Orient, but also the healthiest reforming instincts of the modern liberal West. The illustrious Xi Jinping is merely the latest of this type. As a fifth-generation politician, he's young enough to have successfully fooled himself into thinking that he is a post-Maoist genius of some kind, and not merely a tool of the global elites. And this is why he tends to see himself as the reincarnation of the Chinese emperor in the classical mold, and why he absolutely regards himself as the leading intellectual light behind an unfolding Chinese century. Now, I would argue that he's no such thing, but is rather, like most Chinese leaders since 1949, nothing more than a gangster who's been given way too much power by the masters of the universe.
Yeah.
So, these same masters, the elites of a global society, are now situated and ready to collapse the world's financial structures and take unto themselves yet more of the world's financial and real assets. And the almighty China will be one of their chief agents in bringing about this destruction. So there's kind of the big picture as I'm coming to see it. But if I can just step back and finish up here, to step out of this thread of sort of dark cynicism and talk a little bit about what I think has been happening since the presidency of Donald Trump. A person which, for even his supporters, even Trump supporters would probably say he's a difficult person to like and support. But that being said, it's my informed but far from perfect opinion that there is a kind of civil war taking place inside the ranks of the global elites. And the area of contest would seem to be whether the global or national paradigm of human organization should prevail. Now, Trump, as the head of a nation state and the kind of person who wants to have the best of whatever he's running, as the head of a nation state, he's clearly in the camp of the nationalist faction. And he is in pitched battle with the globalists, from whom he has apparently defected, or was never really let into the club to begin with. It's hard to say. But he seems to be in pitched battle with them. And this is why he's able to make agreements with other strong heads of state, whether we like them or not. Strong heads of state like Boris Johnson, Vladimir Putin, Prince Salman bin Mohammed of Saudi Arabia, and even Kim Jong-un, who's been a question mark since the time he came to power. But there's been a host of other presidents and premiers who tend to see Trump as leading the way of breaking free of control from global intelligence agencies and sovereignty-destroying trade deals. So as to the commitments of Xi Jinping himself, he still seems to be doing the bidding of the globalists, but that also is a question mark. And as the Chinese crackdown of Hong Kong and this problem in the South China Sea are evidence, these things are always, these globalist projects always seem to be well concealed behind what seems to be a nationalist endeavor. So at this point in history, I'll wrap up here, at this point in history, it's very premature to make any strong conclusions regarding such matters as the South China Sea controversy. But looking at this president, Trump's own stand in favor of free navigation, which would interfere with Chinese and by extension globalist control, is much in keeping with the worldview that favors the free sovereign nation state. And although it seems counterintuitive, China's claims in the South China Sea, like its stance in Hong Kong, appear to be positions that support China, but the historical evidence would suggest that it actually supports the globalist model, led by the tip of the spear, which is an acquiescent Chinese client. So the direction that China takes seems to be greatly dependent on the outcomes of what happens in this country. So I think Donald Trump's fortunes are going to be pivotal in how the rest of the world sort of aligns itself. And if Xi Jinping breaks free of the globalist model and actually asserts authentic Chinese power, there will be an entirely new set of concerns to deal with, and they won't necessarily be pleasant. But it seems to me that looking at the claims and the territorial arguments, a Pacific region that has strong, self-confident nations like South Korea, North Korea, Japan, Vietnam, ought to have enough influence and power to keep China's ambitions in check. Again, that's pretty much all I have to offer as by way of thoughts on this. Thank you very much.
Well, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here again as your guest and to be with this distinguished panel. I am not a China specialist or even, very good, thank you, an Asian specialist. I'm a journalist and have been for the last 45 years. But a great deal of my time and efforts over that span have been involved with reporting on, analyzing what is happening with regard to the rising economic and political power of China into the world hegemon that it is today, and also at looking at, analyzing, critiquing those U.S. policies by U.S. political figures and the U.S. media that have promoted this and that have made China into the power that it is today. And I grew up in high school and college during the Cultural Revolution, Mao's murderous decade of the 66 to 76, in which millions of Chinese were murdered by the communist regime, and well over 100 million were traumatized by being put in communist prisons and re-education camps. And I well remember during that period the many Americans such as Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn and others like them. This is when the Vietnam War was going on, when our soldiers were being killed by the communists in Vietnam, and while the Vietnamese people were being slaughtered by the communists. Dohrn, Ayers, and hundreds of others went to Hanoi and to China, met with Mao Zedong and the communist leaders, praised them, glorified them, and then returned back to America and were made college professors, where they have been infecting generations of young Americans with the viruses and the toxins of their ideology. So I saw in my early journalistic career, because I was here in the United States doing undercover work amongst the various communist groups here in the United States. And so I saw how they were networking with these foreign Soviet and Chinese-led communist legions. And so it's been a long journey of trying to expose this and inform Americans about what is the real story behind China's rise and how should we be viewing them. Are they our potential allies, as so many of our political leaders have said? Should we be concerned about their military and economic conquests and aims? So that is what I have focused a great deal of my attention on. This is a copy of our magazine. One of the many stories that we've had, covers stories of the New American on China. This one is China's New Aggression on the World Stage. Another one, which I'll go into in a little more detail, just recently, is this one, China, making your medicine. Most of your prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs are coming from China. So, additionally, for the last 3 decades, I've been a correspondent at the United Nations, both in New York City and at United Nations conferences around the world. And it was with great alarm that I began noticing a couple of decades ago, but increasingly in the last 4 or 5 years, that Communist China has successfully taken over many UN agencies. They dominate now. For instance, the United Nations Civil Aviation Organization, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the United Nations Telecommunications Union, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the International UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, better known as UNESCO, the UN World Health Organization, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, the UN Conference on Sustainable Development, the UN International Police Agency, better known as Interpol. These are just a few of the agencies that they've taken over and put their people in charge of. And there are many other agencies and branches where they have put their people with the acquiescence of the United States and of all of the other members of the UN, which is really a dictator's club, run now by Antonio Guterres, former head of the Socialist International, who is the General Secretary. So we are seeing at the international level where Beijing has essentially achieved a coup at the United Nations. And I can tell you from being at the UN for decades and at these conferences, it is no surprise then that when Fidel Castro came into the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, I was there, they erupted in applause. Viva Fidel, the whole General Assembly and all of the press corps as well, except for me. Viva Fidel, they were just all ecstatic. That is what we're dealing with at the United Nations. And that affects, of course, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which would govern all of the seas, not just the seas, but all of our seaports, all of our rivers, all of the waterways that lead into the seas. China, with the aid of our government and with many of our largest corporations and Wall Street's biggest investors and bankers, has made dangerous inroads into virtually all of our economy and all of our society. I already mentioned medicine. 90% of the sourcing of our prescription and over-the-counter medicines come from China. 90%. Now that should be pretty frightening. I mean, whether it's your cough medicine or whether it's your diabetes medicine or your heart medicine, we're dependent on China for that. We've had similar articles on food. Increasingly, the food that you buy at the stores, particularly if you go in and you're going to buy frozen fish, try to find some that doesn't come from China. Or when you go to the restaurants and order fish, and increasingly meat as well, it's coming from China. Cisco Systems, which provides the food for a lot of the restaurants, that's where they source all of their fish from, and seafood. Technology. China's, made in China, very good, you're right up there with me. Made in China 2025. Most Americans have not heard of that. Everyone in China has. Made in China 2025 is a program announced in 2016 after the Communist Party's convention that targeted all the top technology areas for semiconductors, meaning computer chips, robotics, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, pharmaceuticals, advanced medical products, aerospace, aeronautical equipment, railway transportation equipment, modern maritime transport, new energy vehicles, and much more. All of those were targeted for dominance, just as they have taken over dominance of so much of our other manufacturing base and so much of what we buy today, and we're dependent upon the clothes you're wearing, your computers you're using, all coming from China. Now, when all of the high-end technology comes from there as well, the general could probably tell you. I saw reports 20 years ago, we've reported on it repeatedly. Many of our missiles and our planes and our tanks and our ships and our radar and whatnot are dependent on components coming from our enemy. And yes, we have to say that. That is true. It's politically incorrect. But China's leaders consider us the enemy. And it's not the Chinese people, it's the Communist Party that has usurped control. As Michael said, they're thugs, they're criminals. I already mentioned food as well. Professor Cunningham and my other colleagues here could probably tell you about this next issue. Colleges and universities have become propaganda founts for the Communist Party of China. Is that an extreme statement? No, it's basically true. China has launched years ago, we've been reporting on it for years, an offensive that is on many of our college campuses and worldwide, called the Confucius Institutes. And just the major media, the fake news media, has just discovered this in the last couple of years, when many of these Confucius Institute students, which are sponsored by Chinese intelligence and the Chinese military, started beating up students and faculty at various colleges and universities, shutting down opposition to and any mention of human rights violations in China, etc. But this precedes the Confucius Institutes by many years. They've been building on this. In 1989, you recall, we had Tiananmen Square, the Tiananmen Square massacre. Right following that, I was helping sponsor a speaking tour, among other people, of Dr. Stephen Mosher from Stanford University. He had been bounced out of Stanford, the doctoral program, because he was the first scholar in China, and he started reporting on their one-child policy, which forced abortion and forced all this. So what did Stanford do? They knuckled under to Communist China. They booted him out of the program. So I took him on a speaker's tour. We went, for instance, to California State University in Davis, and while we were there, he was speaking there. All of these communist Chinese students started disrupting the thing, just like you see now with Antifa. They were agents for the communist government. So this was over 30 years ago. Now it's gotten worse on many of our campuses. And another way in which we see this happening on the college campuses is that now, since we've built China into such an economic power, we now have these Chinese corporations and these Chinese billionaires pouring billions of dollars into Harvard, Yale, MIT, all of the major universities, and so they will not allow any kind of adverse programs or statements or activities that will offend China. So these are some of the things that should bring Americans to realize that, look, we're already in a war. This is a very serious situation. Another thing that we should mention, China town halls. They're having these Chinese town hall meetings all across the United States, high-level programs sponsored by the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and the Council on Foreign Relations. All across the country, they put top people like Condoleezza Rice, Susan Rice, other former secretaries of state to head these conferences, and then they have teleconferences all across the country to school and direct particularly high-level elite business and foreign policy people in a pro-Beijing direction. So that it's open propaganda for Communist China that is filtering into all of these venues. Okay, so we have the Silk Road strategy now also. The general may get into this some more. It's also known as OVAR, the One Belt, One Road. Massive program, trillion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar multi-year program initiated by China to build an infrastructure of roads, railroads, shipping ports, manufacturing facilities, power grid, energy supplies, etc., throughout all of Asia that would basically make all roads lead to Beijing, and that all supply lines and all logistics would be dependent upon Beijing. Now this is going hand in hand with their larger global soft power program, they call it, in which they are investing throughout the Caribbean, through the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Europe, and when they invest these hundreds of billions of dollars, they find that, surprise, surprise, they have less and less resistance to their programs because more and more people become dependent on them. If your job is dependent on a Chinese-owned or a Chinese-controlled corporation, and you speak out publicly, and you lose your job, you're not going to likely repeat that again. And other people will see that and will get the example. The whole issue of espionage and intellectual theft is huge. President Trump has made that an issue. China's espionage both in research facilities of companies, on universities, and in exchange programs. All of this, we have to realize, China is still, yes, a communist, totalitarian society. And all people, even those who are presented to us as capitalists, as entrepreneurs, I had one of the slides showed Jack Ma up there, and another one with Bill Gates with Xi Jinping. So we have this false idea about an equivalence between, oh, we got a billionaire Bill Gates and billionaire Jack Ma of Alibaba. Oh, yeah, they're all capitalists. Well, no. If we go back to when the supposed capitalist reform began under Deng Xiaoping, he said this is socialism with Chinese characteristics. And he also said this is modeled on Lenin's NEP, the New Economic Program. And what was that? Lenin said, we will use Western capital. He says the Western capitalists are deaf, mute, blind men. They will sell us the rope to hang them. So that's what they did during Lenin's time for nearly a decade. Now we've been doing it in Deng Xiaoping's time for 3 decades. And they have used this opportunity to get everything they can from us. It hasn't caused them to reform at all, to lessen their totalitarian regime. And so the so-called experts that have been leading us on that road have been really helping to have our country commit national suicide. And if it continues, that is where, in my humble opinion, where we would be going. I think that many Americans are waking up to that. I think, regardless of what one might think about President Trump, he recognizes this. That is why he has stirred up such animosity amongst all the ruling elites, why Wall Street and all the fake news media and everyone hate him so much, because he is upsetting the apple cart. This is the first time in my lifetime, and your lifetime I'm sure, that we have seen a change in that direction. For the last 50 years, since 1949, it has been moving towards supporting the communist conquest of China, and then throughout Asia and now the rest of the world. And this is the first time we've seen a reversal to that. Under both Democrat and Republican administrations in the past, there was always a lot of rhetoric about changing course, but it always has gone in one direction. Now we are actually seeing a change of direction. I, for one, applaud those areas where we are continuing to go there. I'll yield up the rest.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to join this illustrious crowd, as well as this distinguished panel. I'm just a Spokane kid who's had an opportunity to see the world, and in various iterations throughout many years, and a lot of it done in China. My intent is to stick strictly to the South China Sea and let you know some of the things that the United States has planned, both strategically and in terms of with our allies, to deter the particular challenges that have been described so far. My original offering to this fine group was probably about 3 hours long. And I was told that I had to cut that down considerably to about 10 minutes. I'll try to do that honestly. The 9-dash line is the basic.
That is 3 hours long just for you someday.
Well, then we have to go to semesters, Jen. Semesters. We need semesters. The 9-dash line that you see up here is the traditional Chinese claim. That's both Communist China as well as Nationalist China and Taiwan for original claims to the South China Sea. The United States government has publicly stated that the 9-dash line, which the PRC and Taiwan assert delineates their claims to the South China Sea, is contrary to international law. And the previous Secretary for East Asia and Pacific Affairs, Danny Russell, testified before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and said, under international law, maritime claims in the South China Sea must be derived from land features only. Any use of the 9-dash line by China to claim maritime rights not based on claimed land features would be inconsistent with international law. And as my distinguished colleagues mentioned, under the United Nations Convention for Law of the Sea, was negotiated in the 70s and the 80s. Our challenge with that, folks, is that while the United States ratified that, our Congress still has not, I beg your pardon, while the United States signed the treaty, the Congress has not ratified it for us, so we are not actual members of the United Nations Convention on Law at Sea. So we have a hard time indicating that we should follow that when we haven't ratified it ourselves. That's something that we need to do. At any rate, under that particular law internationally, countries can claim exclusive rights to fish and mineral resources within exclusive economic zones which extend 200 nautical miles from continental shore, excuse me, or around islands that can support habitation. There's our challenge. They have tried to show habitation on these particular islands in order to fall in line with UNCLOS, but it is beyond the pale. Next, there we go, we're good. Given that the international state of play in this region is more tenuous than ever, the multi-domain battle concept is sorely needed, and that's what the United States is trying to do. I'm trying to fit all this in, so I'm talking a little fast. This region contains 36 countries, 16 time zones, more than half of the world's population. 24 of the 36 megacities on Earth, and it covers more than half the world's surface area. The region contains 3 of the world's largest economies, 7 of the largest militaries, and 5 of the United States' 7 mutual defense agreement partners. According to the previous PACOM commander, Admiral Harry B. Harris, approximately $5.3 trillion in annual global trade relies on unimpeded access to the sea lanes shown on this slide, such as those in the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea, 1.2 trillion of this sea-based trade destined to or exported from our United States. Additionally, the Strait of Malacca alone sees more than 25% of oil shipments and 50% of all natural gas transits for the world each day. In addition to that, the area is disaster prone. Typhoons, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, and other events representing over 60% of the world's natural disasters. In short, global prosperity hinges on the stability and security of this area. These demographics and economic dynamics interact with the increased rate of technological change to add to the political and military complexity found in the Indo-Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. The freedom of navigation. It's essential, as I mentioned, global economy, and that is the U.S. position, it is the PACOM position. Goods, ideas, and people must enjoy unimpeded movement by air and sea, otherwise the entire global economy suffers, as do our individual people here in the States. The United States Navy and our other services will remain the key guarantor of global freedom of navigation for the foreseeable future, because no one else will be willing to do it, or able to do it. The U.S. and China must work together to create an environment in which international trade continues to move freely without hindrance and international security is enhanced. And that's straight from the U.S. PACOM strategy. Next slide, please. This is the previous stated United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Talked about it briefly. I just want to show that one to you. Next slide, please. All right, U.S. interest. To ensure freedom of navigation, to prevent the use of force to resolve any claims, to advocate for respect for international norms such as UNCLOS, to ensure that all countries have the right to mineral and fish resources outside of legitimate EEZs. In other words, anyone can have freedom to fish, to source for oil, gas, or any other mineral rights throughout the area. Ensure that the rights of all countries are respected. And that the U.S. Senate should ratify the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea so that we are full members of that particular law. Next slide, please. These are the particular areas that we intend to reduce the risk of conflict. To deter aggressive and detrimental actions of any kind, possibly with the use of force. To interrupt decision cycles in this whole arena. To overcome denial technologies, because China in particular has come up with asymmetric ways to deal with anything they want to. In other words, the least path of resistance. We have to be able to deter those actions. We have to overcome those technologies that they've developed, which means while President Eisenhower's indication to us as he left office that we should fear the industrial complex, the armed forces industrial complex, we really have to embrace the fact that in order to derive the synergies from that particular organization and organizations, we need allies, we need all of those folks working together to give us the best. We need our youngsters in STEM to give us the best technologies possible to overcome anything that the enemy has to offer. And be prepared at any time to defeat any enemies. The U.S. Army's major Pacific Area exercise for next year will focus on China-based scenarios in the South and possibly the East China Seas. So that even includes the Army, not just the Navy. The commander of U.S. Army forces in the Pacific just left, General Robert Brown, explained the outlines of the 2020 Defender Pacific exercise at a conference this last March. While the Army focuses on partner building throughout the Pacific, the high-end combat scenarios it prioritized have generally focused on a conflict in the Korean Peninsula, as we've all heard about previously. However, the exercise that we will have this next year will deploy a division-sized force to the South China Sea to augment Army forces already stationed forward in the Western Pacific and operate in traditional U.S. partner nations like the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, possibly even Palau. He did not get into the specifics of the exercise, but the geography of the anticipated multinational participants and the U.S. Army's renewed focus on projecting force across new domains will include such as targeting ships to assist the U.S. Navy with sea control operations, suggests that part of the exercises may look at neutralizing China's fleet and its militarized island bases should it become necessary. So we're leaving no stone unturned in terms of being able to answer the call of our nation and our allies. The United States Armed Forces are at a crossroads, facing both institutional and operational challenges. The character of war continues to change at a quick pace, requiring military leaders to reassess some of their core beliefs. This situation has led to the testing and refinement of concepts, capabilities, and people to ensure U.S. forces are ready for conflicts today and tomorrow. Without doubt, any future conflict will be increasingly complex and distributed, involving actions across multiple domains, to include the South China Sea. We have to be ready to answer all calls. Next slide, please. So I've kept it 10 minutes, and I will welcome questions afterwards. Thank you.
I am happy to be here to present my point of view regarding the program in South China Sea. You see on the left what happened in China Sea. So I will focus on the matter. Okay. It is a kind of China expansionism. They try to expand from Vietnam through China Sea, and then to the whole area of Asia, and all Asia will become their own integrated of China. And then on the Pacific, they want to expand their influence, the control over the western part of Pacific. In 1905, when I was in Hawaii, and the gentleman over there made arrangement for me to see Admiral Keating. He was commander of the Pacific, and he told me that I met a Chinese general. He asked that now we divide Pacific into two parts. West part belongs to China, and the other side to America. So I asked him, what did you answer? He said, no sir, and then I left. So and then we have a picture in here, a map in here. They draw what they want in South China Sea. And also, as you heard of here about the one way, one road, one belt. So they go to India, in Indo-Pacific, in Indian Pacific, and then to the west, and go to the Europe and control Africa too. And so everything is there. Now in here we have a map of part of China Sea, the southern part. They build an artificial island. All of that ore, rich rock, or coral, or đồi cát thing. The top of it, now coming back to the map. Now the top of it is Sibi. It was only a rock in 2008 rock, and then only 15 months since September 2013, and so until 2015, and so it creates artificial island right now. So the area of the civic island is 5.2 square kilometers, and runway is 3 kilometers for big plane to land up and take off, and the wide of the runway is 215 meters. And this way, I think that 24 fighters over there. We have a picture of the fighter, even stealth and other high quality, high advanced bomb are displayed too. on the high, this is the hangar of the fighter. On the north side of the Shibi, they have a cave to store ammunition and supply and everything. And so it is a major base for the whole area. And right now we have three big bases over there. Shibi on one side on the north, and the east side is Midship. And Midship is bigger, and it is 5.6 square kilometers. And they build a lot of building over there, and so we will see it later. On the south side is the ferry coast, and ferry coast is a smaller. It is a 2.6 square kilometers, and with a lot of activities. And on the Subic, they write in last year, and they report that there are 400 houses over there right now. So it means that the house maybe 1,000 troops. Right now, the whole area with help of Chinese military, they could project their power as far as Australia. On the other side, they are capable of control any, secure any area in the region. That is the starting point. And so you have a protection of the island with building and those kind of things. This is a starting point. In the open sea, they will move to the west. And with the One Belt, One Road, you hearing about that. And so they go west. And they are trying to fund whole Asian countries with the infrastructure building, and now they are controlling Sihanoukville in Cambodia, also other Kokok seaport on the west side of Asia, projecting to Thailand Sea, and then to Myanmar, to Bangladesh with the Chittagong Harbor, and then Sri Lanka. You heard about such a noisy thing over there because the reaction of the population of the country about the 199 years lease where the Chinese military installation there. And then to the Indian Ocean, there are two islands. One is the Coco, the other Mandi. They try to control too. And then back to Pakistan with Goa Harbor, and they learn a lot of money when you are not able to pay back, and so they they have to make concession. And then to Tehran and in Djibouti, in Africa, they already have overseas military, though it's small. And with Europe, the country, the first country in Europe is Italy. They have been releasing money from China. However, for the past few months, reaction from the population against the government of the Premier Conte about that. And right now, China controls 3 seaports in Italy. That is the situation. And the main thing is that America is the ultimate target to destroy. Chi Hao Dien was defense minister of China in 1905 make a declaration to generals and many leaders of China. He said that America is the ultimate target to be destroyed. And if we destroy them, and so all other countries in Europe will surrender. And at that time, the dream of China become to materialize. And by what means? He said that we will use biochemistry weapons, but not the nuclear weapon. And if we attack America, we attack Washington D.C., and million people will destroy at one time. Even the President of the United States do not have enough time to convene the Congress to allow him to declare the war. If they lose the war, if China lose the war, so they still have 100 million people right now. So they already sent out, I think, about 13 million people out of the country and infiltrated to America and every place. And in the paper, I use an example of the media from China. It set up university over there, and they train the military. And however, there is one subject matter is how to become good wife, skilled good wife, very good wife, and they export it. And they intend to export 1 million women out of the country to marry American or white people in Europe for a long range, maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years later, they become Chinese people. And they try to achieve their dream, but their dream is that China take over the world, as he mentioned by 2009. We have a lot of pictures, and so Mary would help to show the canker. That is okay. So you will see what happened in China Sea right now. And what you see, they are building things over there.
I think it's time for us to discuss. It's time to discuss the question. 2030, and we have until like 4:50 to discuss. Yes? And sorry about that.
Your microphone's not on.
I think Michael will find some more phrases, and then we can come to the...
I just wanted to show some
The radar boom on Foxtel.
Okay, no problem.
In fact, that is the Duncan where the fighting between South Vietnamese and China when they try to take over. This is they begin to rebuild this section. That's a map of southern part of South China. This should be beginning.
They made that island?
They build them on reefs, they bring in the ships from their mining, and they take roads down and move around.
This is what I was referring to. This is the effort on their part after the fact to show that they are occupied, therefore to be legal under the United Nations Convention on Laws after the fact.
That expands their sea, their personal sea by 100 miles. We're occupied as occupation, but it's manufactured items. But it does actually.
The second island is Japan.
Right.
What are the islands that the Japanese and the Chinese are arguing about?
Senkakus. Again, it's traditional claims versus reality. So it's a revisionist history.
On whose terms?
Well, right now it seems to be on China's terms, doesn't it?
Whoever's weak
So
should go against international law.
The orange and the red dots on that map are where they built things? On this map on the wall. I'm sorry, on that map on the wall? Those red dots, are those where they built islands?
That's a really short. They're building in southern part of behind us.
You want to show more? We can open the mic for the question and answer.